The United States was militarily powerful against the Vietnamese, but it still lost this war. So how? The Vietnam War took place between November 1st, 1955 and April 30th, 1975. In this war, North Vietnam, meaning the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, and South Vietnam confronted each other. However, the fighting did not remain limited to Vietnam alone. Laos and Cambodia were also drawn into the war. In that sense, the Vietnam War became one of the bloodiest and longest examples of the national liberation wars that emerged after colonialism. To understand how things reached this point, we need to look at Vietnam's past. Vietnam is located in Southeast Asia, at the eastern edge of the Indochina Peninsula, and had been under French colonial rule since the 19th century. During the reign of Napoleon III, the French seized regions such as Annam, Cochinchina, and Cambodia. In the same period, the British also entered the region through India and Burma, and competed with the French around the Mekong River. Thus, Vietnam became an arena of rivalry among great powers for many years. During the First World War, this order was shaken once again. This time, Vietnam was occupied by Japan. In 1945, when Japan realized it would lose the war, it inflamed nationalist feelings in the region and armed the population. As it withdrew, it declared that three independent states, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, had been established in Indochina, and left Vietnam under the rule of Emperor Bao Dai. However, this decision created a new power vacuum rather than stability in the region. After Japan's withdrawal, the first military forces to arrive were the British. When British troops reached Saigon in 1945, they realized there was a serious authority vacuum. Nationalist groups were trying to gain control by taking advantage of the post-war disorder. At the same time, France intended to restore the colonial system. By 1946, units affiliated with Free France became involved in clashes under the pretext of protecting the lives of French citizens in the region. In exactly this environment, a new political movement gained strength in Vietnam. Inspired by Chinese and Soviet communism, Ho Chi Minh founded the Viet Minh, also known as the League for the Independence of Vietnam. The goal was to gain independence by resisting both the Japanese occupation and French colonial rule. Japan's defeat and withdrawal from Vietnam in 1945 created a major opportunity for the Viet Minh. Ho Chi Minh's forces moved quickly, seized Hanoi, and the Democratic Republic of Vietnam was proclaimed under Ho Chi Minh's leadership. France did not accept this development. Seeking to regain control of the region, France supported Emperor Bao Dai and established the State of Vietnam, with its capital in Saigon, in July 1949. From this point on, the conflict became even clearer. Both sides wanted a unified Vietnam, but while Ho Chi Minh and his supporters wanted a communist model of government, Bao Dai and his circle envisioned a Vietnam with close ties to the West. This conflict reached a decisive stage in May 1954 at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. Viet Minh forces won a decisive victory. This defeat of the French army ended nearly a century of French colonial rule in Indochina. The Geneva Accords, signed the same year, divided Vietnam along the 17th parallel. In the north, Ho Chi Minh took control. In the south, Bao Dai took control. According to the agreement, reunification elections would be held in 1956, but these elections never took place. In 1955, a strong anti-communist politician, Ngo Dinh Diem, pushed Bao Dai aside and took power in South Vietnam. With this development, Vietnam was no longer just a local issue. The country became one of the harshest fronts of the Cold War. While North Vietnam was supported by the Soviet Union and China, South Vietnam's biggest supporter was the United States. The direct US involvement in the Vietnam War took place between 1963 and 1973. The United States believed it could win the war quickly. However, the reality on the ground did not match expectations. When the US Army failed to achieve the desired result on land, it turned to establishing superiority from the air. In order to destroy Vietnam's natural defensive cover, its forests, napalm bombs and chemical agents such as herbicides were used. Napalm caused severe burns. Herbicides destroyed farmland and crops. The use of chemical weapons caused massive devastation in the country. During these attacks, schools, villages, and hospitals were also unintentionally targeted. While American forces tried to eliminate Viet Cong militants, many Vietnamese civilians were killed because they were suspected of being Viet Cong. As a result, Vietnamese civilians were caught in the middle of the war, and anger toward the United States steadily increased. At this point, the character of the war completely changed. While the United States expected a classic frontline war, it found itself facing a different kind of struggle. Viet Cong units decided not to fight the United States where it was strongest. Instead of standing in open terrain against tanks, aircraft, and heavy weapons, they aimed to drag the war out over time and wear the United States down. Vietnam's greatest advantage was not its weapons, but its geography. Dense forests, swamps, narrow paths, high humidity, and suffocating heat were serious disadvantages for US soldiers. For US soldiers, the forest was a place where visibility was limited to a few meters, and every tree and every bush could mean a potential threat. For the Vietnamese, the forest meant a natural shield to hide behind and freedom of movement. Viet Cong units knew the jungle almost by heart. Which path led where, which stream bed could be crossed quietly, and which areas were suitable for ambushes, these were planned in advance. While US soldiers often did not even know where they were stepping, the Viet Cong used this terrain like their own home. In this environment, the Viet Cong's basic tactic was to strike suddenly and withdraw quickly. With this method, summed up as hit and disappear, Viet Cong units kept US soldiers constantly on edge. And would last only a few minutes, and then the jungle would fall into complete silence. US soldiers often tried to respond without even understanding where the shots had come from. But there would be no enemy left to target. This uncertainty created enormous psychological pressure on your South soldiers. They moved with the constant shots that they could be attacked at any moment. Sleeping at night became difficult. During the day, a constant state of tension set in. More than physical losses, it was this continuous sense of threat that wore soldiers down. One of the most critical elements of guerrilla warfare was the vast underground tunnel systems between with the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong had a secret tunnel network stretching over more than 200 miles. These tunnels being just passageways. Underground, there were supporters, weapons depots, sleeping quarters, kitchens, and watery wells. In 18 words, the Viet Cong could live underground throughout the war. When US units facing an area and their expectations cleared, the Viet Cong had all simply withdrawn with it. When your eyes, those supporters, were entered the tunnels, things became far more dangerous. Dark airless tunnels were filled with traps, improvised explosives and sudden attacks. Soldiers assigned to this task were called tunnel rats, and it was one of the deadliest jobs of the war. Another factor that strengthened the Viet Cong was support from villagers. Some Vietnamese civilians provided clothing to the Viet Cong, shared information, and helped them hide. For US soldiers, the biggest problem was being unable to distinguish who was a civilian and who was a guerrilla. This uncertainty pushed the United States toward harsh measures. To weaken the Viet Cong, the US tried to destroy the forests. Napalm was used. Vegetation was wiped out with herbicides. But instead of eliminating the Viet Cong, these methods alienated the Vietnamese people from the United States even more. The bombing of villages, the destruction of farmland, and harm to civilians increased support for the Viet Cong. Every destroyed village meant new support for the Viet Cong. The US military trusted technology and firepower, but the Viet Cong's strength was not in its weapons. It was in its endurance. The United States would seize an area, but the Viet Cong would return. The United States would suffer losses, but the Viet Cong would survive and prolong the war. In this war, time was working in the Viet Cong's favor, not the United States. By 1968, a development occurred that changed the course of the war: the Tet Offensive. During the Tet Offensive, the Viet Cong set aside classic guerrilla tactics and launched sudden, large-scale attacks targeting major cities. During the Vietnamese New Year, Saigon, Hue, and other key centers were hit. They even reached the area around the US Embassy. Militarily, the Viet Cong suffered heavy losses and could not hold any territory permanently. In other words, on the battlefield, the offensive was a military defeat. But the real impact of the Tet Offensive was psychological and political. Americans no longer believed the story that they were winning the war. The scale of the attacks, the casualties, and the harsh images shown in the media demonstrated that the cost of the war was more than the US public could bear. As a result, President Johnson halted the bombing of North Vietnam in exchange for peace talks in Paris. The effects of the war on the United States grew heavier over time. Throughout the war, more than 100,000 US soldiers lost limbs and needed treatment. Draft dodgers were mistreated. Some left the country. Returning American soldiers were also treated badly by society. Many civilians saw them as ruthless criminals who should be punished or avoided. The defeat of a great superpower by a much smaller and weaker country caused serious demoralization in American society. Confidence in American military capability was shaken. The media played a decisive role in this process. Journalists were sent to Vietnam, and the world was broadcast on television in all its vividness. Images of innocent civilians being killed sparked targeting protests. Famous athletes and artists opposed the war. Muhammad Ali was stripped of his boxing championship title because of his refusal to join the military. In the end, withdrawal became inevitable for the United States. During the Nixon era, the US desire to intervene in Vietnam gradually weakened. In 1975, North Vietnam launched a major offensive. South Vietnam collapsed, and Saigon fell that same year. In 1976, Vietnam was unified under a single socialist republic. The Vietnam War went down in history as one of the biggest struggles of the Cold War era. It was considered one of the greatest military defeats in US history. Around the world, the prestige of the United States was damaged. These words changed not only Vietnam, but over those global perception of how great powers could be defeated.